Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ultraviolet's Inclusive Feminism 101 training call. We've got folks from all over the country, from New York, Texas, Minnesota. I see some people from Michigan, and a lot of other places. We are so excited to do this training with you all because it is so important that the feminism that we all practice is as inclusive as possible. We must understand how identities such as race and gender and sexuality and so many others intersect with one another and how they are core to making the world a more fair and equitable place for all women and people. And as some of you know, Ultraviolet was formed in 2011 to fight for women's equality and create a cost for sexism in the world. But too often, the women's movement and even the larger progressive movement leave out the most marginalized people, especially Black and Brown communities, Indigenous people, and LGBTQ folks. Earlier this week, we sent out a short video on the concept of privilege and an article on the importance of fighting against all forms of oppression. So hopefully you had a chance to check those out, but if not, definitely take a look at them this week. In order to create a more equitable world for all, it's important to have a deep understanding of how the women's movement itself is impacted by white supremacy and patriarchy. And our hope is that you will take away tonight a basic understanding of intersectionality, inclusivity, and privilege, and realize that awareness of these issues makes our organizing better. I'm a trainer on this call tonight, and I can speak for all of us when I say that we are here to help you learn and grow and become more comfortable starting these conversations with other people in your life. But before we get started, I want to make sure that everyone has had a chance to join the visual interface portion of this training from a computer so that you can see the slides as we move through. So for people who are just joining by phone, in order to view the slides, check out one of the reminder emails that you received from us a couple hours ago. And from a computer, click the screen sharing link in step 3, type in your name on the next page, and click Join Meeting. And if you've done that correctly, you should see a title slide that says Inclusive Feminism 101 and today's date. And if you're unable to join the screen share interface for whatever reason, or if it's just not working for you, don't worry. We will send around a video recording of this presentation in the next couple of days, as well as a link to these slides, so you can always go back, look at them later, reference them whenever you need to. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go over the agenda. So first, we'll start off with a round of introductions of the Ultraviolet staff members who are on this call. Next, we'll dive into some background. Third, will be a section on what is intersectionality and how does it help us understand the world. Fourth, we'll talk about how Ultraviolet uses an intersectional lens in campaigning, and these might be campaigns that you've been a part of. And we'll also have a section on next steps and wrap up. And just so you all know, we've blocked off an hour and 15 minutes for this training. So in case you're wondering why we're going past the hour, that is intentional. And there will also be plenty of time for questions at the end, as well as time for some questions in between sections. So with that, let's get started on some introductions. I can go first. My name is Natalie Green. I'm the Communications Manager and Spokesperson at Ultraviolet. I am a cisgender Black woman. I run all of Ultraviolet's social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I make feminist content to help reach all of you and people all across the country. I also represent Ultraviolet in the media and at in-person actions. And outside of work, I'm a part of In My Words, which is a multiracial, survivor-led movement to reimagine justice and healing for all survivors of domestic and sexual violence.
Awesome. And hi, this is Susan. I'm so happy to be on the call with you today. My name is Susan Hildebrand. I'm a white queer organizer and the National Field Director at Ultraviolet. I've been working on field and digital campaigns for about 11 years, starting with climate justice, working on bank accountability, working on healthcare reform and women's rights, most often with a focus on nationwide coordinated action. Outside my work with Ultraviolet, I've been a board member with the Chicago Abortion Fund for several years, and I'm very active in reproductive justice work in Chicago.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Rastegar. I'm the Deputy Field Director here at Ultraviolet. You can use any pronouns when referring to me, including he, they, or she. I'm a biracial, first-generation Asian American. I identify as a gay, cisgender man. And as the Deputy Field Director here, my job is basically to support Ultraviolet members in taking action offline and organizing to fight in your home districts. So whether that's, by showing up at your representative's office for a meeting, or maybe organizing a local protest, or anything in between. And I've been an organizer for over 10 years and have dedicated my career to training and mobilizing fellow activists to fight for a more just and equitable society.
Thanks, Susan and Ryan. And now I'd like to introduce our special guest trainer. Charlene Carruthers is a strategist, author, and a leading organizer in today's Black liberation movement, and she is currently serving as Senior Advisor to Ultraviolet. As the founding National Director of Black Youth Project 100, she has worked alongside hundreds of young Black activists to build a national base of Black 18 to 35-year-old activists dedicated to creating justice and freedom for all Black people. Charlene is a Black queer feminist with over a dozen years of experience in racial justice, feminist, and youth leadership development movement work. She was recognized as one of the top 10 most influential African Americans in the Route 100, one of Ebony Magazine's Woke 100, an emerging power player in Chicago Magazine, and is the 2017 recipient of the YWCA's Dr. Dorothy I. Height Award. She's also the author of the best-selling book, Unapologetic, a Black, Queer, and Feminist Mandate for Radical Movements. We are so thrilled to have her on this call today, and so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Charlene, who's going to take us through the next couple of sections.
Awesome. Thanks, Natalie, and thanks to everybody on the Ultraviolet team for making this happen. Just for folks listening, I want you to know that this type of training and workshop was prioritized by the staff and the team, and said we really need to make this happen. And so a lot of work went into pulling this together because it matters to our work and it matters to our movement. And so in this section, we're going to go over a few things. First, we're going to talk about why we're even here, what's the purpose of it. We're going to go over a couple of key terms so that we can have some common language in this conversation, right? And also, we're going to go over that term intersectionality, which we know is used so much in so many places. And how I'm going to talk about this is by sharing some Black feminist history, because the term intersectionality, or the theory of intersectionality, comes out of Black feminism. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Sojourner Truth, the Combahee River Collective, and the person, Kimberly Crenshaw, who is the scholar who actually coined intersectionality as a framework. And as someone who really enjoys doing this work and has been doing it for quite some time, I know that I didn't just wake up one day knowing all these words, knowing how to do all of this and how to talk about it. And so I totally understand that this may be new for a lot of people, and actually that's great. And it also may be review for some folks, and that's great too, because this type of work, which many people understand as political education, should be a lifelong journey, just like anything else. No one is born with a certain set of values. All these things are learned, and no one is born with a certain set of understanding about the world. We have to actually learn those things. And so our hope is to actually lay a common foundation so that we can have a productive discussion throughout this workshop, and so that it can be applied to you. You can use it to apply in your real life situations. And honestly, I want to be really clear that for some folks, this just might be the beginning, and for others, this may be continued work. And so please look at it like that, and write down all the questions that you have, because we will have opportunities for people to ask questions. So let's get into it now. So one of the things that I found to be extremely important as an organizer is actually the use of story. I found that stories actually bring people to the work, bring people to taking action, and just make people care, and also story allows people to connect with other people. But all too often in women's movement spaces, the story is incomplete. We're telling incomplete stories. We're saying we're all women without any other additions to the many lived experiences of folks. So me, as Natalie shared, I am a Black queer woman. I'm from the South Side of Chicago. I was born and raised here. I have many identities. I was at best raised, I guess you call it working class-ish. I would say on the lower, the other end, not towards the middle class end. And I have a lot of stuff that I've experienced, and even more importantly, a lot of systems that play into how I experience the world. And so as an organizer, my work is about trying to tell the most complete stories as possible about people, so that we can have complete solutions. Because in telling incomplete stories, that actually leads to incomplete solutions. You can't just make 3/4 of a pie when you bake it. You actually got to bake the whole thing, right? And it's up to you to what you do afterwards. But there's no such thing as only making a part of something. We want the whole pie when we're talking about people. And so let's go ahead and move into some specific terms here. So again, we know that people throw around a lot of words in social justice movement work and in the women's movement as well. And many of you may have seen a graphic floating around on the internet with 3 people standing at a fence or a gate. And so this graphic, I wanted to just take it to a different level and go a bit deeper. So the words equality, equity, and liberation are used all the time. And I think they're actually sometimes used as if they're all the same thing, but they're not. And I actually believe in all 3 of them, that I'm very clear that equality and equity are not actually sufficient for us in order for us to create the kind of world that is a transformed world where we're all able to live in right relationship with each other and right relationship with the land that we live on. And so when most folks talk about equality, they're talking about treating everyone the same, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I want to treat people well, but equality doesn't necessarily mean that it's fair, because oftentimes it doesn't take into account where everyone is actually starting from and what everyone actually needs. And then our next favorite word in social justice movement is equity. I've noticed that equity is being used more and more in universities and colleges, at organizations, all types of programs. And again, I'm not against equity. I think equity is very important. Equity can be understood as giving everyone what they need in order to be successful. So as you see in the image, everybody can see above the fence here. But we still have to use boxes for people to be able to see. And similar to the first picture, right? We have 3 people standing on boxes and everybody can't see it, but they all got the same thing, but we still have people who can't see over the fence and actually see the game. And then we get to liberation. As I mentioned, everyone being in right relationship with each other and the land that we live on. That's just one way. There's so many ways to define liberation. There's no fence at all. People can see. You don't need an extra box. You don't need anything else. And of course, no graphic is perfect, because we know that all people have different abilities, and sometimes what it means to be able to see the baseball game is to have support, right? You may be you may have a wide array of accessibility needs, be it physical, visual, mental, language, all kinds of things. And this image is totally not perfect, but what I wanted to do in sharing this image with folks is that we don't just want to give everybody the same thing and say, oh, well, you all have access to books, so you should be fine. Or we don't want to just say, we're just going to give you an extra push so you can get to the same level. What we actually want is so that the levels are not even the primary factor of you experiencing something, and that people are actually free to exist and to live and be and have their full dignity in that process. So equality, equity, and liberation. Those are three words I want people to just continue to think about. So, moving forward, some other words that I want to make sure that we get to that are also commonly used words in our movement. And those words are diversity, inclusion, and justice. And so I've often found, particularly like in the school setting, people using the word diversity a lot. And just to be completely honest with y'all, oftentimes when people say diversity, that means, oh, we have a black person in the room, or we have an easily identifiable LGBTQ person in the room, so we're good. Actually, that's not enough. Having many different pieces of a puzzle in the room doesn't actually speak to the work that we have to do, right? Difference alone doesn't actually require us to do the work. And diversity without this next term of inclusion is actually insufficient. So what are we talking about when we are talking about inclusion? What I mean is really thinking and being intentional about creating environments where any individual or group can be and feel welcome, respected, and supported, and valued to fully participate and to lead. It shouldn't always be a case where you're holding a meeting and you're trying to be inclusive. Actually, the people who you want to be inclusive of should be in leadership positions. So inclusion, just for inclusion's sake, still isn't sufficient. And you're probably like, oh my gosh, he just wants me to do all of these things. Well, it's a journey. It's a journey, and it's about us always pushing ourselves to the edge with other people, because you shouldn't be alone in this work to say this is actually not enough and we can do better. And so we're talking about a road here, right? And then the next piece that is super important is justice. So we can have diversity and we can have inclusion, but if we're actually not addressing the impact of the suffering caused by systemic harm, violence, and conflict that people experience from various systems, including white supremacy, anti-Black racism, patriarchy, classism, and the general system of capitalism and how that impacts people, then we're not addressing what's in the room and who's in the room. And there are several versions of this quote, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, but there is a quote that says that justice is what love looks like out in the world. It's like love in practice. And it's about addressing and recognizing what has happened and doing the work to repair that. And so I know many people, or maybe many people, are familiar with the national conversation and also international conversation about reparations that's happening right now. That's for reparations for chattel slavery in the United States is not simply an issue of diversity or inclusion. It's a matter of justice for many folks. So let's go ahead and move into a little bit more background here. So I like to explain things with using really concrete examples. And there's a Black feminist scholar, her name is Alexis Pauline Gumbs, and she talks about Black feminist writings and work as sacred texts. And what she means by that is that so much of the work that's been done by Black feminists is something that is it can allow us to have a deeply personal and a connection to other people. You may call it spirituality, you may call it connection. There's many ways to think about it. And one of those pieces that is one of the most important pieces of writing and work done in the Black feminist tradition in the United States of America is the Combahee River Collective Statement. So the Combahee River Collective was a group of Black women, including Black lesbians, who organized in the late 1970s through 1980. And in this statement, they said that if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression. And talking to the women who are part of the Combahee River Collective today, they make several things clear. They make it really clear that they understand that indigenous women and indigenous women and indigenous people of marginalized gender identities are amongst the people who have to get free. People of many marginalized identities or marginalized groups, are among the people who must get free. And when they say women, they mean all women. They mean all Black women, cisgender women, women who identify with the gender that they were given at birth or labeled as at birth, and women who don't identify with the gender they were born with and are transgender, and people who identify as non-binary. And so if I'm using words that you're like, what do you mean? Please write them down, and there'll be a lot of resources that are sent after this call. Let's go to this next piece. So as I move through more history, I'm not going to give a whole spiel on Sojourner Truth because I could talk for an hour about her. But I think what's most important is that Black feminist traditions they've been around for a very long time, even before Black feminism was a term. And in Sojourner Truth's speech, where she asked the question and made the demand as well of "Ain't I a woman?" really captures what we mean when we're talking about working through an intersectional lens. Let's go to the next one. So I'm going to ask everyone to think about wearing a pair of glasses. So when we put on a pair of glasses, be it a pair of sunglasses, prescription eyeglasses, any kind of, or reading glasses, or glasses just because they're cute and you want to wear them because they look good, they automatically, what glasses do is they impact the way we see the world. A lens impacts the way we see the world. And so intersectionality is a lens for us to understand the world, right? And so when you put on a pair of, let's say we're putting on our intersectionality lenses on our faces, right? What that requires for us to do is to actually look at people in their wholeness. So Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality in 1989, is a full-time professor. She's also an activist and does a number of different projects across the movement. And when she introduced and developed the theory of intersectionality, what she was saying and really bringing into the world is a study of how overlapping or intersecting social identities, particularly marginalized identities, relate to systems and structures of oppression, domination, or discrimination. And this theory is specifically rooted in the lived experiences of Black women. So she took the experiences of Black women and said, I'm not just Black, I'm not just a woman, my experiences as being Black and woman are impacted by various systems of racial injustice and gender injustice. Let's move to the next piece. And so with this framework, we are then able to see how multiple identities that one person may have can't be separated. Like, I can't come into the room just as Black one day or as queer one day or as woman one day. I come into the room with everything. And so the second thing I want folks to leave with is that the national conversation about identity politics is really incomplete. Identity politics can be explained as political stances, actions, beliefs, or that individuals engage in based on how they identify along the lines of many different identities, be it race, class, religion, disability, or any sexuality, many things. But identity does not equal politics. Politics are actually a choice. Let's move to the next one. Oh, actually we have time for questions, but I'm going to stop there. So we just went through basics of intersectionality being a lens of how we can understand the world. We talked about diversity, inclusion, and justice. We also talked about equality, equity, and liberation, and a little bit of Black feminist history as well. So with that, we're going to open it up for a couple of questions, or one or two questions. Ryan, I'll hand it over to you.
Cool. Thank you so much. So yeah, if you have a question about any of the background info that Charlene just went over, go ahead and press 1 on your phone now, and we will call on a couple folks. All right, I see a few folks. Let's go to Louisa in New Hampshire. Louisa, go for it. You have the mic.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. And thank you so much, Charlene, for the presentation. It's just amazing that you have been at the heart of the main issues that we all face. I'm a Black woman. I am very active in politics, and as you said, it's a choice. But I'm active in the Democratic Party, but I do find that racism is an issue. I'm the only Black person in a very Caucasian environment, and of course I do suffer from, people dismissing me, not taking into account my opinions, and so forth. All the things that you know of that come with racism. How can I apply what I learned today in my community that's predominantly Caucasian and no LGBTQ, rarely, and we don't have anybody that's LGBTQ, and I'm a Black woman, and I've recently withdrawn as much as possible from working in the field, but just doing work in the home, writing for them because I'm a writer. I'm a former broadcaster and journalist, so I do all the writing, I do all the work, but I don't get the credit because I'm Black. I ran for office in 2018, and I was a victim of death threats. I had to barricade myself at home for 10 days prior to the election. They had to have police to escort me to vote and to escort me out of the precinct as if I was living in a dictatorship just because I'm Black. So how can I incorporate these things that I'm learning with people that don't even attend or talk about Black issues at all? And if you talk about it, they look at you like you're crazy. Why you're raising an issue of race or gender or so that's the difficulty. I wish they would go through this training. And shall I offer it to them? Would I be allowed to learn this and do a presentation to them on this?
Gotcha. First, thank you for sharing with us, and thank you for your question. I'm sorry that those things happened to you. It shouldn't be that way.
Thank you.
So how to use this information in your work, I'll share just a little bit because Susan is actually going to say a lot more about that towards the end of the call, about what people can do moving forward. But I will say that you have to find your people, and that none of us can do this alone, and that both the beauty and the challenge of doing grassroots community organizing is that we have to actually do the work of building relationships with other people. And we, as I'm sure you know this, are so much more powerful when we have more people with us. And that as a Black person, and as another Black person, I'm super clear that I can't do all the work that white people need to do for themselves. That I have to find co-conspirators and accomplices who are white, who are willing to do that work with other white folks. And that doesn't mean, I'm not one to say you should just Google it, right, or just find your way. And there has to be people who are willing to do that work and take it on, because you cannot be the single person in the room trying to educate everyone else. That's right. One, that's not the kind of world that I personally think we should live in, where we have a single educator or a single person having to speak on the behalf of everyone else. And it's a responsibility of white folks to do that work, to dismantle white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And then adding on, it's up to people who have gender, who who aren't from marginalized gender identities, who have power in that way, to also do that work. And so when we're talking about intersectionality, all of these things have to come into play. And the good news is that there have been people doing this for a long time before us. And so I thank you for your question. And I know there's so much more I could say, but I want to make sure that we move out into the next piece so we can get into the meat of really answering your question about what to do next.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how oh, sorry, Ryan.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just saying, do you want to go into the next section, and then we'll have more time for questions after that, too.
Awesome. So let's go into how intersectionality can help us understand the world. So last weekend, we can go to the next slide, Ryan. Last weekend, the abortion care slide. I'm not sure why that one didn't go up. Okay, great. So last weekend, I was actually in South Carolina at a presidential town hall and had the opportunity to ask one of the presidential candidates a question about access to abortion care. And how I started talking about it was actually through a story that I experienced as a child and that many women, Black women, brown women, many folks experience across this country in trying to receive access to the stuff that we need, access to resources to buy food and to pay our bills, things like that. And so for me, it's super important that when we talk about issues like access to abortion care, that we don't tell a single story, one, of who needs abortion care in the first place, right? Because we should know that women who are cisgender, as I mentioned earlier, women who identify with the gender that they were given or, labeled as at birth, transgender people, in particular transgender men, and gender non-binary people are all people who need access to abortion. And so if we're telling a single story of abortion being, just this identity neutral woman out there, then we actually end up having incomplete solutions, right? So while we know that Roe v. Wade is crucial to maintaining the status quo of access to abortion, and while in-state abortion bans hurt people across those states, it's important that the solutions we propose need to address all people. Because we can propose solutions, again, right, that only meet the needs of certain type of people, say women, and don't meet the needs of other people. That got us into trouble, or has gotten us into a lot of trouble with the Hyde Amendment, not taking into account how abortion is an economic justice issue. The next issue that we're going to go into is maternal mortality. And so many of us know, and I think increasingly it's been in the news, that both pregnancy and childbirth come with unique health risks, right? And that maternal mortality rates are on the rise in the United States, but the risks are not all equal across all groups. And so my colleague at Ultraviolet actually, I don't know if she feels okay with me saying her name on the call, sent me a bunch of information that I just frankly did not know, specifically about Native women. I didn't know, and I was like, wow, I didn't know this information. Thank you for sharing it with me. And as a Black woman, I see information in news about the disproportionately high rates of death that Black women are experiencing during pregnancy or childbirth, and because we're 3 or 4 times more likely to experience a pregnancy-related death than white women in this country. And we don't even have the numbers for Black people who don't identify as women. So I don't even know, but I imagine that risk is still there. And so when it comes specifically to Native women, we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to read a quote from the article that my colleague sent me, where it says that Native women also bear the burdens of negative health impacts from historical trauma borne out of past federal policies supporting genocide, forced migration, and cultural erasure. These examples include forced placement on reservations, attendance at boarding schools, relocation programs, and moving Native peoples from home communities to cities. And so reproductive justice, access to abortion care, maternal mortality are things that are impacting people in many different ways. And so as we talked about these different groups that people belong to, if you're fighting for sovereignty, right? If you live in an indigenous community or a part of a group of indigenous people, and you're fighting for sovereignty, that actually impacts your ability to have access to services. It impacts your ability to make decisions over your lives. And what we know is that the United States government has intervened over and over and over again in ways that are actually violent and dangerous to Native communities. And as a Black woman, I understand that as being connected to me, and that if we're going to be serious about addressing maternal mortality in this country, we actually can't just take into consideration one group of women or people. We have to look at the whole story. And so lastly, the piece that we're going to talk about before I hand it back over is sexual assault. So many of us were first exposed to the Me Too movement because of high-profile white women in Hollywood. They were speaking out about sexual violence that they were experiencing, which absolutely matters. And at the same time, many people didn't actually know that Me Too was started by a Black woman, and her name is Tarana Burke. And so it's super important to not just understand that this Black woman started Me Too and with Black girls in mind and Black girls centered. It is important to note that sexual violence and assault can actually be can vary across racial groups and economic groups, right? If women in Hollywood are vulnerable to and experiencing sexual assault and sexual violence, what does that mean for women working in the fast food industry, women working in domestic work, women doing farm work, women who are teachers, women who don't have as much access to money and power and privilege? And so no sexual harassment is okay. No sexual assault is okay. But again, we want to tell as complete of a story as possible so we can have complete solutions. And so those are just a few examples of how we can look at women's issues through an intersectional framework. And in doing that work, we can lift up and center experiences of people who have been historically marginalized. So now I'll pass over to Ryan, who I think is going to open it up again for us for questions.
Thank you so much. I actually am thinking let's keep it moving. And
okay, cool.
Let's actually go to Natalie's section, because then we can do questions after that, if that's cool.
Great. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ryan. So at Ultraviolet, we are really intentional about making sure that our campaigns are intersectional from the start. So I want to go over a few examples of campaigns that you may have taken action on that had an intersectional lens. So first I want to talk about Shakisha Clemens and Dinah Loving. You may have heard their names and their stories before. Shakisha Clemens is a Black woman in Alabama. Dinah Loving is a Black woman in Florida, and they were both assaulted by police. But if you didn't hear these stories, that's because the media often doesn't cover stories like this enough. Shakisha Clemens asked for utensils at an Alabama Waffle House. Local police arrived on the scene, threw her to the ground, and assaulted her. Shakisha was charged with assault and is still fighting this outrageous charge to this day. Just this year, Dinah Loving was threatened by a racist neighbor, and she called the Miami-Dade Police Department for help. But instead of getting help, she was brutally attacked by Officer Alejandro Geraldo. He escalated the situation, dragged her to the ground, and told her she should be sent to a mental hospital. And thanks to outrage from across the country, these absurd charges against Dinah were quickly dropped, and the officer is currently on unpaid suspension and facing charges. But we chose to take these campaigns on and to support local organizers who are demanding justice for these women, because too often Black women are left out of the conversation about police use of violence and lethal force. And too often feminists don't talk about this issue too, and we cannot allow police violence against Black women to be swept under the rug. Next, I want to talk about R. Kelly. Earlier Earlier this year, Sony Music, the parent company of RCA Records, finally severed ties with R. Kelly. Sony's decision was the result of years of activism led by Black women-run organizations, including the R. Kelly Movement, Black Women's Blueprint, and Girls for Gender Equity. We took the lead of these organizers and partnered with them on this campaign because it highlighted the intersection of sexual abuse of women and girls and race, and because the work of Black women organizers is often erased. R. Kelly is a serial sexual abuser who got away with decades of abuse specifically because his victims were Black women and girls. A Georgetown University study found that adults view Black girls as less innocent and more adult-like than their white peers. These adults also perceive girls, literal children, Black girls, to be more independent, more knowledgeable about sex, and in less need of protection. R. Kelly used this to his advantage, and we cannot end the cycle of violence without centering the experiences and demands of survivors who are Black, of color, Indigenous, and LGBTQ. Next, I want to talk about equal pay. I imagine that 99.9% of people on this call, if not 100%, have heard the stat that says the average woman makes just 80 cents for every dollar the average white man makes in this country. But that is not the whole story. The gap is significantly wider for most women of color. While the average Asian woman makes 85 cents for every dollar a man makes, white women make 77 cents, Black women make 61 cents, American Indian and Alaskan Native women make 58 cents, and Latinas make 53%. And I should note that the average that I just gave for Asian women varies widely based on ethnicity. For example, the average Thai and Vietnamese woman will make less than 65 cents. And in order to end the pay gap, we have to talk about the role that racism plays in hiring processes, salary offers, and treatment at the workplace. At Ultraviolet, we are very intentional about ensuring that all of our campaigning about equal pay highlights the disparities between race. And you can see that in this graphic that we have here. Because we cannot have pay equity if any group of women is left behind. And then next, I want to talk about reproductive rights. So this is something that Charlene touched on quite a bit, but I want to talk a bit about how Ultraviolet's work around reproductive freedom has changed literally within the last few months and for the better. For a long time, bodily autonomy, birth control, and abortion have been framed as strictly women's issues in the sense that straight, cisgender women are often seen as the only people impacted. In truth, anyone with a uterus, cisgender women, transgender men, non-binary people, and gender non-conforming people can have abortions. Also, lots of people use contraceptives to help relieve endometriosis, painful periods, and lots of other medical issues, not just straight women. And the Trump administration's attacks on Medicaid, Obamacare, the Hyde Amendment, and reproductive health as a whole hurt women of color, Indigenous women, low-income people, and LGBTQ people. But when someone lives at the intersection of 2 or 3 or more of those identities, they're more likely to be hurt by the things that Trump and the GOP are doing every day. In the midst of the recent wave of attacks on abortion access, we and other pro-choice organizations have made sure that our graphics, our emails, our campaigns, and the messages that we send reflect the diversity of people who need reproductive freedom. And I want to take a step back real quick and say that making these changes did not happen overnight. I can speak for myself, even as a progressive Black woman. It took me a lot of reading, a lot of educating myself, and listening to communities that I'm not a part of to make these changes in how I speak and how I understand the world. But our liberation depends on it. So with that, I will hand it over to Ryan to take a few more questions before we jump into our last section.
Awesome. Let's do some more questions now before we jump into the last section. So again, if you have any questions over anything so far, go ahead and press 1 on your phone now, and we will try to call on some folks. right, let's see here. Let's go to Kate in Florida. Kate, go for it. You have the mic.
Okay, well, thanks. This is, I just want to say I feel really happy that I'm here. I mean, it's under, of course, there's so much exploitation on women, and that was my point I wanted to make, and I'm just so glad to be in a discussion about this, because it isn't too often where you could talk about this. But when there's that disparity in pay, and where people of color are getting paid less than white women, we're talking about a super exploitation, because we're not just talking about people not making an equal pay, but we're talking about people exploiting them and people making a super profit off of their wages, off of their labor, I guess is the right way to say it. So, I think, it's important to realize this is a for-profit system, and that the capitalist system allows for this race disparity in addition to the gender disparity. And I think we need to see it as super exploitation against people of color. And that's all I had to say.
No, thank you so much. I think that's a very, very good analysis of what we talked about. So thank you for saying that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Kate. Let's go next to, let's go to Joyelle in Maryland. Joyelle, go for it. You have the mic.
Hi. Thanks again for having this training. So my question really centers around intersectionality, of course, but especially with white women. I do a lot of race and equity work, and I am constantly encountering white women who weaponize their white womanhood and queerness as a way to co-opt conversations and circumvent any conversations around race and things like that. So I would just love any feedback you would have on how you have handled those type of situations, or any recommendations you may have for combating those types of situations when we have white women co-opt spaces by using their white womanhood and queer identities.
Ooh, that's a good one. Got right to the beat of it. Thank you for that question. It is something, the first time I ever experienced, so first I'm going to say I hear you, and I have similar experiences in this work. Like people may, specifically with, in queer spaces, with white folks or non-Black people of color, that can also be a real thing, because anti-Black racism is very real. And it can also, I want to add to this example, it can happen in queer spaces with cisgender men, with women experiencing it from cisgender men. And it's because we think we all have a marginalized identity, then we must all be equal, on equal footing. And we don't have any equity issues, or we don't have any justice issues to actually address. And that's just not the truth. And so I think that's a part of the hard work that has to be done, in saying, yes, we all have experiences of being marginalized in different ways. And there are ways that some people in this room have access to power and privilege, because privilege in and of itself is connected to systems of power. It's not just that you just woke up white and you just happen to have access to things. No, it's actually connected to real institutions, real systems, real dominant ways of thinking, being, and doing. And so that conversation has to be had, that we're not all coming at this in the same way. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there have to be willing and able white folks. And by ability, I mean willingness to accept it and willingness to communicate across it, and in spite of any level of discomfort, to address the thing. And you shouldn't have to deal with all of the pain and the fight and the struggle of saying, yo, this is whack. I also see it in all Black spaces, particularly with folks who are even marginalized within Black communities. transgender folk, people who are disabled. Like that's a real thing. And so we have to have really honest conversations and saying, yes, I hear you. You have this experience, you have suffered, and we all have different experiences. It's not about sameness, or it's about making connections. And in order to make those connections, people have to admit to the power and the privilege that they're bringing into the room.
Helpful. Very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for those great questions. Let's go into the very last section here, and then we will have all the rest of the time left until 15 past the hour to get to as many more questions as possible. So with that, I will pass it over to Susan.
Thanks, Ryan, and Charlene and Natalie and everybody for being on the call. As has been said before, for some people on this call, this might be just a lot of review, concepts that you've read about and talked about and perhaps even trained about. And for others, this might be just a lot of new ideas and perspectives. So just to get a sense of who's on the call, this is the first time that we've done something like this. We're going to ask you to press on your phone 1 through 5, just sort of how new was this to you? So press 1 if you felt like this was all just totally new, like brand new, so much new information. Press 5 if you feel like, I'm not saying I could have given this presentation, but I know a lot of this already. And then, anywhere in between, 2, 3, or 4. So press 1 if this felt all pretty new. Press 5 if this feels like almost exclusively review. Or, pick your gradient between 2, 3, and 4. Great, it's fun to watch everybody voting. Thank you. So just so you all know, we're pretty across the board, skewing a little bit more towards the 3, 4, 5, but definitely people landing all across the board. So thank you for that. That's just really helpful. Well, as we're wrapping up for wherever you are, 1 through 5, but I do particularly want to speak to people who feel like this is a bit newer. I have a few suggestions, 4 suggestions, in fact, as you start digesting or continue digesting some of the information that you're learning and take it with you the rest of your week and your life and the movements that you're in. So you can take notes or, we'll send things out after the call. But first is to assess and adjust the media and the voices that you're taking in. So just do a little inventory of your bookshelf, your favorite TV shows, the journalists that you trust to tell you about the world, the people you're following on social media, your music collection. Notice what voices may be missing and then actively make some changes. So if you, like me, are a part of the women's movement and you notice that a lot of the women you're following are white women who are feminists, you're going to be missing a lot of voices. So do that. Check out what you're listening to, what you're reading, and make some adjustments. I very much trust that you can, we're going to send out some suggestions after this call, and I really trust that you can start there, especially on social media, and then find lots of other people that you trust and can learn from. Tip number 2 is to learn history. For so many of us, what we learned in school was wrong, absolutely wrong, and if not wrong, incredibly incomplete. It's just not possible to address what happened in the past and to organize to correct it if we don't know that it happened. And this is true about the history of our movements as well. So it's on us, and I'm speaking more to white women and white people right now, it's on us to recognize the racist, classist, queerphobic past of the women's movement, but also just this history that we don't know in the world. So as a kid, I wasn't taught that Christopher Columbus committed genocide, right? I wasn't taught that he was enslaved indigenous people, that he assaulted young girls. But that's the truth. That's the truth of who that person was. I didn't learn that Susan B. Anthony and other suffragettes actively used anti-Black rhetoric to get white women the right to vote. But that's the truth. That's what actually happened. And we can't pretend those things didn't happen because they shape what's true today, whether we consciously know it or not. So that's the second tip, is to learn history. My third tip is to know that you're learning, and it's okay to learn. It's even maybe okay to make mistakes every once in a while, or if it's not okay, it's at least inevitable. But when those mistakes, even unintentionally, harm people and communities that you're claiming to be an ally to, you should be prepared to be held accountable. And it feels pretty bad to make a mistake. It's really easy to get defensive. And someday, if it hasn't already happened to you already, you may be called in for your words or actions either in person, or you may read an article and realize, oh my goodness, I've done that thing, I've said that thing, I've thought that thing, that now I'm realizing as I'm learning more was harmful. And if and when this happens, if you have an experience of defensiveness, of anger, or an inability to confront your privilege, if you can come back to a calmer moment, I just really want to encourage you to take a pause, to say thank you, maybe to a person literally in front of you, or to yourself if it's, something that you're reading, to say thank you for the opportunity to learn, and to remember that even if you did not literally, personally, all by yourself create these oppressive structures, if you are white, if you're cisgendered, meaning, somebody who's assigned birth at sex matches your gender identity today, if you're straight, if you're able-bodied, or if you have wealth, you benefit immensely from these oppressive structures. So it is your responsibility, it is our responsibility to learn and to do better. And my fourth tip is when you're organizing events or working on advocacy campaigns, really intentionally, not just at the beginning, not just when you're starting to plan the campaign, but throughout the process, check in with your intersectional lens. And notice I'm speaking in like a women's rights space now. Will the solutions that you're offering actually support all women, including women of color, especially Black women and Native women, including low-income women, including trans women, including immigrant women? So, for example, if you're holding a rally for abortion access, will the solutions that you're putting forward mean that low-income women have access to abortion? Or will the solution that you're putting forward mean that only people who have money in their pocket to pay for an abortion have access to an abortion? I think Charlene said, way at the beginning of the call, we need the whole pie. You can't make half of a pie. So after this call, we'll send out a few book lists and other resources. It is not exhaustive, and especially some of you who pressed 5, who literally do these trainings or have done a lot of your own work, I would love for you to send additions. You can just literally reply to the email that goes out and say, hey, you missed this awesome book. And maybe if we get a lot of them, we'll send out more again. But I will suggest just a couple of resources. So one is that you should read Charlene's book, probably. It's Unapologetic. You can get it all the places where books are sold, online, and maybe even in a cool local bookstore. 2 is, maybe a lot of you already follow her, but if you don't already, I would follow Rachel Cargill on Instagram. In particular, this summer, she is doing a reading series. Then the books she's starting with are Killing the Black Body by Dorothy Roberts, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. But when people were signing up for this call, a lot of people said, how can I get involved in my local community? How can I continue doing this learning in my local community? There's a lot of ways to do that, but it's pretty generous that Rachel Cargill is offering you a lot of free resources to read some of these fundamental texts and maybe do that, with friends or other people in your community. Alan Salway is also on Instagram. His handle is Lil Native Boy. A lot of education there. So again, if you're on Instagram, it's a great place to get some more education. Not everybody's on Instagram. I have a bias towards Instagram. But the Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality, has a podcast called Intersectionality Matters, if that's more your style. Everyday Feminism is an e-magazine. MTV Decoded is short show that you can watch on YouTube or go to MTV that talks about a lot of these issues that we're talking about. So those are just a couple of resources. Like I said, we'll send out more, but I hope that those tips and resources can be helpful as we're all moving on this journey together. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Ryan.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much. So that basically completes the formal presentation portion of this training. So I guess I was going to do a quick recap. I don't really think we need to, because I would really just love to hear from all of you for as much as possible. So for these last 10 to 15 minutes or so, I'm going to try to take as many questions as possible. So if you have something that didn't get answered yet, or maybe something that we didn't quite cover, but you're really eager to hear some of the trainers on this call dive into a bit, please go ahead and press 1 on your phone now, and we will start to call on some more folks. All right, let's start with Andrea in California. I hope I said your name right. Andrea H., you have the mic.
Hi, it's Andrea. But I'm so happy to be here with you, and one of the things that occurs to me is when we are in political spaces and we're listening to pundits talk about identity politics, and it's almost as though it's become a bad word when in reality having political stances that take into account the things that make you who you are, and that's the lens by and through the way you make decisions, especially about elected officials, people who are supposed to represent your interest. It's almost like, do you see, and any of the speakers can address this, do you see a way to kind of take that narrative back? Because it seems like folks that would oppress folks have taken identity politics and they kind of use it as a way to dismiss people's experiences and their needs and their issues, when in fact it's a way to put them on the table so that they can be dealt with. So, it's almost like, this dichotomy of identity politics being a good thing for us to represent our issues versus, foes using it as a bad word.
For sure. So thank you for bringing this back up, because I actually meant to say earlier that identity politics is older than the United States Constitution, and that white men, particularly white Christian men, who are also landowners and owners of people, meaning they like owners of enslaved Africans, exercise identity politics all the time. And so once people from marginalized communities use politics rooted in their identity, that it becomes a problem. So I talk about it in Unapologetic, how right after Hillary Clinton, after the 2016 campaign season or presidential election, a lot of white men, Mark Lilla is one in particular, and I'm forgetting the other white man's name, were basically like months before, long before that, they were like actually in support of identity politics. But once Hillary Clinton lost in the presidential election, a lot of them started blaming women, black folks, brown folks, LGBTQ folks, immigrants, all kinds of people, and saying that identity politics is a bad thing. And so we should all be clear that identity politics is something that all groups engage in, and that if we are interested in collective liberation, we should actually engage in identity politics that is about getting us all free and organizing from your particular, engaging in identity politics from your particular identity. You're a white woman, a black woman, a person who is disabled, an undocumented person or person who is undocumented, all of those things, it is like, what are the values that you have that are informed by your experiences, and what are the actions that you take that are informed by your experiences, so that we can all be closer to collective liberation. And that, I think that's a way that we can engage in an identity politics that's liberatory and not one that actually squeezes out possibilities like the identity politics of the political so-called right in this country.
Thank you.
So I'll stop there. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Great question. All right, next, let's go to Amelia in South Carolina. Amelia, go for it. You have the mic.
Hi, my name's Amelia. I was planning on, I have an idea of starting my own women's movement, but I also wanted to join others to actually get the full understanding of how it actually goes.
So are you wondering if there are, like, what recommendations the trainers on the call might have?
Yes.
Susan, Charlene, Natalie?
Could you repeat the last part of your question? Sorry.
Well, I was actually looking to join the women's movement of how it, because I'm so confused.
Oh.
I
got you. I think you're trying to figure out how to get involved, like now?
Yeah.
Like what to do? Okay, cool. So, one, thank you for being an Ultraviolet member and being a part of the work that we do here. And then two, I'm not sure where you are in South Carolina. And you don't have
Columbia.
to say that. Okay. Oh, you're in Columbia. Okay, I was just in Columbia. So there are organizations that are doing work specifically like in the reproductive justice space, some people that I just met. And it may take a little bit of digging around. You may have to go to a rally or an event. But oftentimes I find that that's the easiest way to meet people. So you can look for groups that are actually fighting. And there are even people who are doing some work. I just met some folks who are doing work to end, like, shackling of pregnant people and pregnant women in jails and prisons in South Carolina. It may take, I guess the biggest encouragement without, like, knowing a name of all the groups is be patient with yourself and be patient with other people, because oftentimes folks are doing this as, like, volunteers, and it may take you a little bit to figure out where you fit, but look to, like, you may have to do a little bit of searching around for organizations that are doing, like, reproductive justice work. If there's a local abortion fund, there may be an abortion fund in South Carolina. And even if you don't do the organizing there with the local abortion fund, you can find out other organizations just by going to one of their events. So sometimes it may mean going to an event for an organization that you may or may not be interested in, to then find out about other organizations and other work that's happening on the ground. But be patient with yourself and give yourself some time and other people time to figure out, how to get involved.
And I can also add that if you're in South Carolina and you're interested in reproductive freedom work, that Sister Song does a lot of great work across the South.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much for that question. Next, let's go to Shani in California. I hope I'm saying your name correctly, but Shani, go for it. You have the mic.
Hello, and it's actually Shani.
Shani, hello.
Yes, but thank you for having me. I'm so excited my questions get answered, yes. So my question is, I am a 5th grade teacher in North Carolina, and I will be teaching students that are from Puerto Rico, Honduras, El Salvador, different areas like that. And I want to know what are some resources and some tips how best to empower them in their advocacy. And that's my question.
Thank you so much. Which one of the trainers wants to take this one?
This is Susan, and I'll just jump in to say that is so wonderful. These students are so lucky to have you as their teacher. And I don't know the answer, but I'm very willing to do a little bit more research and get you some resources, because I know that there are a lot of guides out there for how to work with young people. I just don't know them, but I'm so grateful for the question and the opportunity to do a little research into that. I don't know if Charlene or Natalie, you have more helpful advice than that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Look forward to it.
So I'd have to see if they do work outside of New York, but one of the groups that I mentioned, Girls for Gender Equity, they're really all about empowering youth organizers and young women and young girls to become activists in their community, especially around racial justice. I know that they're based in New York, so I can't say for sure that they do work in North Carolina, but it might be worth seeing if they do. But I agree with Susan that we can definitely look into it.
Okay, appreciate that.
All right, thank you so much for the question. Well, so with that, we are actually at 15 past the hour, so I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I do see that there are still a number of questions, a number of folks who have questions that we did not answer yet, and so to you I want to say, please do contact us. I have contact information. You can email us, you can Facebook us, you can tweet us, send us a message on Instagram. Please do reach out to us with anything that we didn't get to, or even if you think of something later, and we will definitely respond to you. And so with that, I do want to end the call. Thank you again so much to everybody, to each and every one of you who took time out of your evening to hop on this call. It was just really wonderful to hear from folks all around the country who are interested in continuing to have these conversations and continuing to grow. And as we said at the beginning of the call, we will be sending out a recording of this presentation, as well as the training slides and a more comprehensive list of resources in the next couple days. Additionally, we are hoping to send, we will send a feedback survey in the next couple days as well. We'd love to know what you thought of this training. This is the first time that we're doing this training, and so we're just really eager to see, and hear from all of you what you thought, if you have any feedback, really anything that you want to share with us. So please do keep this conversation going with us. And again, thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.